The autumn leaves crunched under Eleanor's feet as she walked through the garden one last time. She touched the rose bushes she had planted 20 years ago when she first came to live at the Grand family estate. Her fingers trembled, not from the cold October wind, but from the weight of what she was about to do. Inside the mansion, the Richardson family gathered for what they believed was another ordinary Sunday dinner. Eleanor watched them through the window. There was James, the eldest son, helping his young daughter tie her shoe. Sarah, the middle child, laughed at something on her phone, and Thomas, the youngest, set the table with the same careless energy he had shown since childhood. Margaret stood at the head of the dining room, her sharp eyes surveying everything. She had married into the family 15 years ago, and since then she had always felt like an outsider. Not because anyone treated her poorly, but because Eleanor's presence cast a shadow she could never escape. Eleanor was not just James's first wife's sister. She had raised the children after their mother died. She was their real mother, in every way that mattered. Eleanor took a deep breath and walked inside. The warm air hit her face, carrying the smell of roast chicken and fresh bread. She had cooked this meal herself, just like she had done every Sunday for the past 20 years. But tonight was different. Tonight, she would tell them she was leaving. Aunt Eleanor, Thomas's daughter Lucy, ran to her with open arms. Eleanor caught the 6-year-old and held her tight, perhaps a little too tight. Lucy pulled back and looked at her with those bright blue eyes that reminded Eleanor so much of her late sister. "Why are you crying, Aunt Eleanor?" Lucy asked, touching Eleanor's cheek. Eleanor hadn't realized tears had escaped. She quickly wiped them away and smiled. "Sometimes grown-ups cry when they're happy, sweetheart, and I'm very happy to see you." Margaret watched this exchange from across the room, her jaw tight. It was always like this. Eleanor was the sun, and everyone else just orbited around her. Even her own husband, Richard, looked at Eleanor with a fondness that made Margaret's stomach turn. Not romantic fondness, but the deep affection reserved for family members who had earned their place through years of sacrifice and love. As they sat down for dinner, Eleanor noticed how Margaret had positioned herself at the head of the table again. It was a small thing, but Eleanor understood the message. This was Margaret's house now, Margaret's family. Eleanor had always sat at the other end, never challenging this arrangement. "The food is wonderful as always, Eleanor," Richard said, raising his glass. "What would we do without you?" The question hung in the air like a prediction. Margaret's smile was strained as she added, "Yes, though I did help with the vegetables this time." "You cut 2 carrots, Sarah said with a laugh. "That hardly counts as helping." The table erupted in good-natured teasing, but Eleanor saw the flash of hurt in Margaret's eyes. This was the problem. Margaret tried so hard to fit in, to be needed, but Eleanor's presence made her feel invisible. Eleanor had watched this dynamic for years, hoping it would improve, but some wounds just festered with time. "I have something to tell you all," Eleanor said, her voice cutting through the laughter. The room fell silent. Even little Lucy seemed to sense the importance of the moment. Eleanor looked at each face around the table. These people were her world. She had given up marriage prospects, career opportunities, everything to raise James, Sarah, and Thomas after their mother died. She had been 25 then, full of dreams of traveling the world and starting her own restaurant. Instead, she had poured all that energy into creating a home for 3 grieving children. "I've been offered a position," Eleanor continued, her voice steady despite her racing heart, "managing a small inn in Scotland. It comes with a cottage and a chance to start fresh." The silence was deafening. James's fork clattered to his plate. Sarah's mouth hung open. Thomas looked like someone had punched him in the stomach. "Scotland?" Richard finally managed. "But that's so far away." "When?" James asked, his voice rough with emotion. "Next month," Eleanor said. "The current manager is retiring and they need someone with experience." I've already accepted. Margaret's heart raced, but not with sadness. For the first time in 15 years, she felt like she could breathe. Finally, she would have a chance to be the matriarch of this family, to step out from Eleanor's shadow. She tried to keep her expression neutral, but inside, she was already planning how to redecorate Eleanor's room, how to change the Sunday dinner tradition, how to finally make this house truly hers. "You can't leave," Thomas said, his voice breaking. "This is your home. We're your family." Eleanor reached across the table and took his hand. "You'll always be my family, but it's time for me to have my own life. You're all grown now, with families of your own. You don't need me anymore." "That's not true," Sarah protested, tears streaming down her face. "We'll always need you. I need you. Who will I call when the baby won't sleep? Who will teach Lucy to make your famous apple pie?" Eleanor's carefully built composure began to crack. She had prepared for this moment for months, but seeing their pain was almost unbearable. "You'll figure it out. You're stronger than you know." Margaret cleared her throat. "Well, I think it's wonderful that Eleanor is following her dreams. We should be happy for her." The words were right, but her tone was too bright, too eager. James looked at his wife with surprise. "Happy? She's abandoning us and you're happy?" "She's not abandoning anyone," Margaret said defensively. "She's living her life. Isn't that what we all want for the people we love?" The way she said love made Eleanor look at her sharply. There was something in Margaret's voice, a note of triumph that she couldn't quite hide. Eleanor had always suspected that Margaret resented her, but she had never seen it so clearly. "I need some air," Thomas said, pushing back from the table and storming out. Sarah followed him, still crying. James sat frozen, staring at Eleanor like she had betrayed him. "James," Eleanor said softly, "please understand. I've given 20 years." "And we're grateful," he said, his voice cold. "So grateful that we can't imagine life without you. But apparently you can imagine life without us just fine." He left the table, leaving Eleanor, Margaret, Richard, and confused little Lucy. Richard excused himself to check on his children, taking Lucy with him, and then it was just Eleanor and Margaret. The two women sat at opposite ends of the long table, the abandoned meal between them like a battlefield. Margaret picked up her wine glass, took a sip, and finally let her real feelings show. "They'll get over it," Margaret said. "People always do. And honestly, Eleanor, this is probably for the best. You've made them too dependent on you. They're adults who still act like children when it comes to you." Eleanor studied the woman across from her. Margaret was beautiful, successful, and intelligent. She was a good wife to Richard and tried to be a good stepmother. But she had always been competing with a ghost, first with the children's dead mother, and then with Eleanor, who had stepped into that role. "You're happy I'm leaving?" Eleanor said. It wasn't a question. Margaret shrugged. "I'm happy for the opportunity to finally be the lady of this house without feeling like a guest. Is that so terrible? For 15 years I've lived in your shadow. Everything I cook is compared to your meals. Every decision I make is questioned because Eleanor wouldn't do it that way. Even my own husband looks to you first when the children have problems." "I never meant—" "I know you didn't mean to," Margaret interrupted. "That almost makes it worse. You're so naturally perfect at everything. The perfect aunt, the perfect cook, the perfect mother figure. Do you know what it's like to compete with perfection?" Eleanor felt a wave of sadness. She had been so focused on the children that she had never considered how her presence affected Margaret. "I'm not perfect. I'm just familiar. Once I'm gone, you'll have the chance to create your own traditions, your own place in this family." "Exactly," Margaret said, raising her glass in a mock toast. "To new beginnings." The sound of footsteps made them both turn. Thomas stood in the doorway, his face red and blotchy from crying. How can you sit there celebrating while our family falls apart?" He had clearly heard at least part of their conversation. Margaret's face flushed with embarrassment and anger. "Your family isn't falling apart, Thomas. It's evolving. Something you might understand if you weren't so determined to stay a child forever." "Margaret!" Eleanor said sharply. But the damage was done. Thomas looked at Margaret with pure hatred. "You've been waiting for this, haven't you? Waiting for Aunt Eleanor to leave so you could finally take over? Well, guess what? You'll never be her. You'll never be our mother. You're just the woman our father married because he was lonely." The words hung in the air like poison. Margaret stood up so fast her chair scraped against the floor. Her face had gone from red to white, and her hands shook as she gripped the edge of the table. "How dare you?" she whispered, but her voice grew louder with each word. "How dare you speak to me that way in my own home?" "Your home?" Thomas laughed bitterly. "This was Aunt Eleanor's home long before you showed up with your designer bags and fake smiles. You think we don't see through you? You think we don't know you've been counting the days until she leaves?" Richard appeared in the doorway, Lucy clinging to his leg. "What's going on here? Thomas, why are you yelling?" "Ask your wife," Thomas spat. "Ask her why she's so happy that Aunt Eleanor is leaving. Ask her about all the times she's complained about living in Eleanor's shadow." Richard's face darkened as he looked at his wife. "Margaret? What is he talking about?" Margaret's carefully constructed facade finally cracked completely. Years of suppressed resentment came pouring out. "Oh, so now you want to know what I think? After 15 years of ignoring my feelings, now you care?" She turned to face the whole family as James and Sarah returned, drawn by the shouting. "Yes, I'm glad she's leaving. There, I said it. I'm glad because maybe, just maybe, I'll finally get to be more than the woman who isn't Eleanor. Do you have any idea what it's like to wake up every day knowing you'll never measure up? To watch your husband's children run past you to get to their aunt? To plan family events only to have everyone ask if Eleanor approves?" "That's not Eleanor's fault," Sarah said, her voice shaking. "She never asked you to compete with her." "She didn't have to." Margaret's voice cracked. "Her mere existence was competition enough. Saint Eleanor, who gave up everything for the children. Eleanor, who makes the perfect roast. Eleanor, who knows exactly what to say when someone's upset. Eleanor. Eleanor. Even at my own wedding, people spent more time thanking her for the cake she made than congratulating me." Eleanor stood up slowly. The pain in the room was suffocating, and she felt responsible for all of it. "Margaret, I'm sorry. I never realized." "Of course you didn't," Margaret laughed harshly. "Because you're so good, so selfless, you couldn't imagine that your presence might be hurting someone. Well, it has been. Every single day for 15 years. Richard moved toward his wife, Lucy still attached to him. "Margaret, please, let's talk about this privately." "Privately?" Margaret's eyes were wild now. "When has anything in this family ever been private? When have I ever gotten to have you to myself without the ghost of Eleanor hanging over us? Do you remember our anniversary last year? You spent half the dinner talking about how Eleanor used to make the same dish for special occasions. I didn't mean—" "You never mean to," Margaret said, tears finally spilling over. "None of you ever mean to. But that doesn't change the fact that I've been the outsider in my own marriage, in my own home, with my own stepchildren." James stepped forward, his lawyer instincts kicking in. "Margaret, you're upset. Maybe we should all take a break and discuss this when everyone's calmer." "I've been calm for 15 years, Margaret shouted. "I've smiled and nodded and pretended it didn't bother me when you introduced me as Dad's wife instead of your stepmother. I've accepted that every holiday would be done Eleanor's way. I've watched you all worship the ground she walks on while treating me like furniture. Well, I'm done being calm." She grabbed a plate from the table and threw it against the wall. It shattered, making Lucy scream and bury her face in Richard's shoulder. The sound seemed to shock everyone, including Margaret herself. "Margaret!" Richard said, horrified. "You're scaring Lucy." "I'm scaring her?" Margaret laughed hysterically. "What about what you've all done to me? What about the damage to my mental health from never being good enough?" Eleanor moved around the table, her instinct to help overriding everything else. "Margaret, please, let me—" "Don't touch me!" Margaret backed away. "This is exactly what I mean. Even now, you have to be the hero. You have to be the one who fixes everything. Can't you just let me have this moment of anger without trying to make it better?" Thomas couldn't contain himself any longer. "You want to be angry? Fine. But don't blame Aunt Eleanor for your own insecurities. She welcomed you into this family. She taught you family recipes, included you in traditions, helped plan your wedding. As a reminder that she was here first," Margaret screamed. "Every kindness was just another way of showing me that she was the real heart of this family, and I was just a replacement for her sister." The mention of their mother made all three siblings freeze. It was the unspoken truth that hung over everything. Eleanor wasn't just their aunt. She was their mother in all but blood. "You're not a replacement for anyone," Richard said quietly, finally finding his voice. "I married you because I loved you, not because I needed someone to fill a role." "Then why?" Margaret asked, her voice breaking. "Why do you still have her picture in our bedroom? Why do the children still call Eleanor for Mother's Day? Why am I always the second choice, the backup plan, the one who's here but not really part of things?" Eleanor felt like she was drowning. She had tried so hard to include Margaret, to make her feel welcome, but now she realized that her very presence had been a barrier. "This is why I'm leaving," she said quietly. "Not because of a job in Scotland. Because I finally realized that as long as I'm here, this family can't move forward." "No," James said firmly. "You're not leaving because of her jealousy. That's not fair to anyone." "It's not about fairness," Eleanor said. "It's about what's best for everyone. Margaret deserves a chance to build her own relationship with all of you without me as a constant comparison. And you all need to learn to be a family without me at the center." "So you've been planning this?" Sarah asked, hurt evident in her voice. "You and Margaret have been discussing your exit strategy?" "We've never spoken about it," Eleanor said. "But you knew," Margaret said, some of the fight leaving her voice. "You knew how I felt." Eleanor nodded slowly. "I suspected. Little things over the years. The way you tensed when the children came to me first. The forced smile when Richard praised my cooking. The way you always sat at the head of the table claiming your territory." "My God," Richard said, sinking into a chair. "How did I miss all this? How did I not see what was happening in my own home?" "Because you didn't want to," Margaret said bitterly. "It was easier to pretend everything was fine. Easier to have Eleanor handle the emotional labor of the family while I just existed on the periphery." Thomas looked around the room at his broken family. His father looked shell-shocked. His siblings were crying. Margaret was shaking with years of suppressed emotion, and Eleanor, steady, reliable Eleanor, looked like she might collapse at any moment. "This is insane," he said. "Aunt Eleanor announces she's leaving, and suddenly we're all at each other's throats. This isn't who we are." "Maybe it is," Margaret said quietly. "Maybe this is exactly who we are, a family built on politeness and pretense, held together by one person who's been carrying all the weight. Without Eleanor, we don't know how to function." "Then we learn," Eleanor said firmly. "That's the point. You learn to be a family without me. Margaret learns to be the matriarch she wants to be. The children learn to see her as more than just their father's wife. And I finally get to find out who I am when I'm not defined by taking care of everyone else." Sarah wiped her eyes. "But what if we fall apart? What if without you here we can't—" "You won't fall apart," Eleanor said, though her voice wavered. "You'll struggle at first. You'll make mistakes. Margaret will do things differently than I did, and that will feel wrong. But different doesn't mean bad. You'll find your own way." "And if we don't?" James asked. Eleanor looked at him. This boy she had raised into a man, and felt her heart break a little more. "Then you'll figure it out, because that's what families do. They fight, they hurt each other, they say things they can't take back, but they also forgive and adapt and find new ways to love each other." Margaret sank into a chair, the fight suddenly gone out of her. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I didn't mean for it to come out like this. I've been so angry for so long." "We know," Richard said, moving to his wife's side. Lucy had been taken out by James during the worst of the shouting, and now he tentatively put his hand on Margaret's shoulder. "And I'm sorry, too. I should have seen it. I should have done more to make you feel like this was your family, too." "It's not just you," Thomas said, surprising everyone. "We all did it. We all compared her to Aunt Eleanor. We all made her feel like an outsider." He looked at Margaret with something approaching understanding. "I'm sorry for what I said. It was cruel." Margaret looked up at him, tears streaming down her face. "I've tried so hard to love you all, but it's hard to love people who don't seem to need you." "We do need you," Sarah said softly. "Maybe not in the same way we need Aunt Eleanor, but that doesn't mean we don't need you. You're Lucy's grandmother. You're the one who helped James through his divorce. You're the one who taught me about investing. We're not good at showing it." The broken plate still lay scattered on the floor, its pieces catching the light like tears. Eleanor quietly got the broom and began sweeping up the fragments. It was such a typical gesture, Eleanor cleaning up messes, making things right, that it made Margaret laugh and cry at the same time. "Let me," Margaret said, reaching for the broom. "I threw it. I should clean it up." Eleanor hesitated, then handed over the broom. It was a small gesture, but everyone in the room felt the significance of it. For the first time in 15 years, Eleanor was letting Margaret take responsibility for something in this house. As Margaret swept, the others sat in uncomfortable silence. The air was thick with everything that had been said and everything that still needed to be said. Richard poured himself a scotch with shaking hands. James returned with Lucy, who immediately ran to Eleanor but stopped halfway, looking confused about whether that was still okay. "Come here, sweetheart," Eleanor said, opening her arms. Lucy climbed into her lap, and Eleanor held her tight. "Sometimes grown-ups say things they don't mean when they're upset, but everything's going to be okay." "Are you really going away?" Lucy whispered. Eleanor's eyes filled with tears. "Yes, darling. But not because I don't love you. I'll always love you no matter where I am." "Like my mommy in heaven?" The innocent question made Sarah gasp softly. She and her brothers had been older when their mother died, but the parallel was painfully clear. "Not quite like that," Eleanor said carefully. "I'll still be here on Earth. You can visit me, and I'll visit you. We can talk on the phone and send letters." "And video calls," James added, his voice rough. "We'll set up video calls every week." Margaret finished sweeping and stood awkwardly with the dustpan full of broken china. I'll just throw this away." "Margaret, wait," Eleanor said. "We need to talk about this. All of us. Really talk. Not just yell and blame." Margaret set down the dustpan and returned to the table. Richard pulled out a chair for her, and she sat down heavily. They all looked at each other, a family fractured but not yet broken beyond repair. "I meant what I said," Eleanor began. "I am leaving, and not just for a job. I've realized that my presence here, however well-intentioned, has prevented this family from fully forming. Margaret's right about that." "But she's wrong about why you stayed," Thomas said. "You didn't stay to overshadow anyone. You stayed because we needed you." And now you don't, Eleanor said gently. Not in the same way. You're adults with your own lives. It's time for me to have mine. Richard cleared his throat. I owe everyone an apology, but especially you, Margaret. I've been blind to your struggles. I thought because you never complained directly that everything was fine. I should have known better. We all should have, James said. I'm a lawyer. I'm supposed to be good at reading people, seeing beneath the surface. But I never saw how much you were hurting, Margaret. I'm sorry. Margaret looked around the table at these people she had tried so hard to love and be loved by in return. I'm sorry, too, for the plate, for the screaming, for letting it build up this long. I should have said something years ago instead of letting the resentment poison everything. Why didn't you? Sarah asked, genuinely curious rather than accusatory. Margaret thought for a moment. Because I was afraid that if I admitted how I felt, you'd choose her over me, and I'd rather be second best than nothing at all. Oh, Margaret, Eleanor said softly. It was never a competition. There was room for both of us. Was there? Margaret asked. Really? Because it never felt that way. Every family gathering, every holiday, every crisis, everyone looked to you first. Even Richard. Richard started to protest, but Margaret held up her hand. It's true, and you know it. When James was going through his divorce, who did you tell him to talk to? When Sarah had pregnancy scares, who did you suggest she call? It was always Eleanor. Because she'd been through similar things, Richard said weakly. I've been divorced too, Margaret said. I've had pregnancy scares, but no one knew that because no one ever asked. Eleanor's experiences were family lore, told and retold. Mine were just irrelevant. Eleanor felt the weight of this truth. She had been so busy being needed that she hadn't noticed Margaret trying to find her own place. You're right. We created a dynamic where I was the go-to person for everything, and that wasn't fair to you. It wasn't fair to any of us, James said slowly. We never learned to rely on each other because Eleanor was always there to fix things. Maybe her leaving is what we need. The words hurt Eleanor, even though she knew they were true. Thomas made a sound of protest, but Sarah put her hand on his arm. He's right, she said. As much as it hurts, he's right. We've been children for too long, running to Aunt Eleanor instead of dealing with things ourselves or turning to each other. Or to me, Margaret added quietly. Or to you, Sarah agreed. And that needs to change. They sat with this realization for a moment. Outside, the sun was setting, casting long shadows through the dining room windows. The untouched food on the table had long gone cold. So what do we do now? Thomas asked. How do we fix 15 years of dysfunction in a month before Eleanor leaves? We don't, Eleanor said. We start small. We start today. Margaret, I want you to help me plan my going-away party. Margaret looked surprised. You want me to? It should be your event, Eleanor said firmly. Your chance to show this family what you can do when you're not competing with my shadow. I'll give you all my recipes, my traditions, everything, but you'll make them your own. And we'll help, Sarah said, looking at her brothers. Really help, not just show up and eat. Margaret's eyes filled with fresh tears, but these were different from before. I don't know what to say. Say yes, Richard said, taking her hand. Say yes, and let us try again. All of us. Over the next few hours, they talked, really talked, for the first time in years. Margaret shared stories from her past that no one had ever asked about before. Eleanor admitted how scared she was to leave, how she sometimes felt like she'd missed her own life while living theirs. The siblings acknowledged how they'd taken both women for granted in different ways. Lucy fell asleep in Eleanor's arms, and Margaret reached over to brush the hair from the child's face. She's going to miss you terribly. She'll have you, Eleanor said, and you'll be wonderful with her. You already are when you let yourself be. As the evening wore on, they made plans. Eleanor would teach Margaret her famous recipes, but Margaret would also share her own family traditions. The siblings would make an effort to include Margaret in decisions and conversations. Richard would be more mindful of how often he invoked Eleanor's name. "And I'll work on my insecurities," Margaret said. "Maybe see a therapist. Deal with why I felt so threatened instead of blaming everyone else." "We could all use therapy," James said with a rueful laugh. "Family therapy might not be a bad idea." "A family that goes to therapy together stays together," Thomas joked weakly. "It's worth a try," Richard said. As midnight approached, they were all exhausted but somehow lighter. The truth, however painful, had set something free in all of them. Eleanor stood to go to bed and Margaret stood too. "Eleanor, I need you to know something. Despite everything I said, despite my jealousy and resentment, I do recognize what you've done for this family. You gave up your youth to raise these children. That's extraordinary." Eleanor felt tears prick her eyes. "Thank you for saying that. And I want you to know," Margaret continued, "that I'll take care of them. Not the way you did. I could never be you. But in my own way. I promise." "I know you will," Eleanor said. And for the first time in years, she meant it. The next month passed in a blur of preparations. There were tears, of course. Moments when the reality of Eleanor's departure hit them anew. But there was also something else. A gradual shifting of the family dynamic. Margaret took charge of planning the farewell party, and it was spectacular. She incorporated Eleanor's traditions, but added her own touches. The siblings found themselves going to her with questions, including her in conversations. It wasn't seamless. Old habits died hard, but it was a beginning. The night before Eleanor left, she found Margaret in the kitchen, practicing one of Eleanor's signature dishes. "The secret is to add the herbs at the very end," Eleanor said, coming up beside her. Margaret smiled. "I know. I've been watching you for 15 years, remember?" They cooked together in comfortable silence, and Eleanor realized this was what they could have had all along if fear and resentment hadn't gotten in the way. "I'm scared," Margaret admitted suddenly. "What if I can't fill your shoes?" "Then don't," Eleanor said simply. "Wear your own shoes, make your own path. This family doesn't need another me. They need you, the real you, not the you that's trying to compete with a ghost." Margaret nodded, blinking back tears. "I'll miss you. I know that sounds crazy after everything, but I will." "I'll miss you too," Eleanor said, and meant it. The next morning, the whole family gathered to say goodbye. There were tears, promises to visit, and more tears. Lucy clung to Eleanor until the very last moment. "Remember," Eleanor said to all of them, "I'm not disappearing. I'm just living my own life now, and you're all going to live yours, together." As the taxi pulled away, Eleanor allowed herself one look back. They stood together on the front steps, Richard with his arm around Margaret, the siblings close by, Lucy waving frantically. They looked like what they were, a family. Not perfect, not without scars, but learning how to be whole without her at the center. Margaret stood at the heart of the group, no longer in anyone's shadow. She raised her hand in farewell, and Eleanor saw in that gesture not an ending, but a beginning, for all of them. 3 months later, Eleanor received a video call from the family. They were gathered for Sunday dinner, a tradition that continued but had evolved. Margaret had cooked, but so had everyone else. The table was set differently, the menu had changed, but the love was still there. "We miss you," Thomas said, "but we're okay. Better than okay." "Margaret taught us to make sourdough," Sarah added. "It's nothing like your bread, but it's good in its own way." Margaret appeared on screen, flour in her hair and a genuine smile on her face. "The secret is patience, something I'm learning a lot about these days. Eleanor smiled, her heart full. Her leaving had nearly torn the family apart, but in the end, it had given them the chance to come together in a new way. Margaret's jealousy, once exposed to the light, had transformed into something else, determination to be the family member she'd always wanted to be, now that she had the space to do it. As Eleanor ended the call and looked out at the Scottish hills from her cottage window, she felt peace. She had given her family the greatest gift she could, the chance to grow without her. And in doing so, she had finally given herself permission to grow too. The family was different now, but different didn't mean broken. It meant evolved, stronger, more honest. And that, Eleanor knew, was worth all the pain it had taken to get there.